And speaking of the weather, we've heard Al talk about the areas of drought impacting portions of the state this year. Well, another consequence of the dry weather is the nitrate concerns that come out of forages grown during stressful conditions like a drought. Unhealthy and potentially fatal levels of nitrates can make their way into cattle when they eat those forages. Nebraska Extension Beef Systems Specialist Mary Drewnoski joined me to discuss some nitrate management options.
With the drought that a lot of Nebraska has been experiencing this year, any annual forages that they've planted that experience drought have a tendency to accumulate higher nitrate levels. So when we're talking about annual forages, we're talking about oats, we're talking about sorghum sudan. Sorghum would be typical ones that somebody might have been planting later this summer. And then really anything that's an annual. Brassicas can do this as well. So turnips and radishes, they also accumulate high nitrates. And the challenge is that anything that stunts the growth of the plant, whether it be, a lot of cool, cloudy weather, whether it be drought, or if we have a situation like hail, which is sometimes also happens, and it gets rid of some of the leaves, and so it just stunts that growth. The plant itself can still take up nitrogen from the roots, but it may not be using it as quickly, and so that's when our nitrate accumulates in the plant.
And Mary, what are some of the symptoms cattle can experience with nitrate toxicity?
Yeah, so the way nitrate toxicity works is really that nitrate itself is actually not toxic, which is kind of interesting, but the animal consumes the nitrate, and then in the rumen, there are bacteria who can convert it to nitrite. And nitrite is our toxic compound. It's the one we don't want to build up in the rumen, because if it spills over into the blood, it actually causes the blood not to be able to carry oxygen. And thus the animal actually suffocates. So a lot of times with nitrate poisoning, you don't really see a lot of symptoms until you see an animal that's dead, because a lot of times it's just that they'll sometimes have a little labored breathing, or you might notice that they seem to, if you give them a little exercise, they seem to be out of breath, panting a little bit more quickly. And so most people don't see that with their livestock until they actually succumb to the problem.
And I think something that might go overlooked is the nitrates in a cow's drinking water. What are the recommendations for that?
Yes, so nitrates in water are actually even more difficult to deal with because they're actually more readily available. And so if a producer happens to have a situation where their livestock water is high nitrates, like there are certain regions in the state that do have some higher nitrate water, and then you couple that with some forage that's a little bit higher nitrate, you're much higher risk of having a problem because your total load is just so much increased. So if you have a situation where your forage is higher nitrate, you might want to test your water just to double check that you don't need to be accounting for that in your thresholds of how much you think you can handle in the situation of feeding a higher nitrate forage.
Let's talk about some of those nitrate management strategies. What are some things you found that work best?
Well, so it really depends a lot on the situation we're talking about, but one of the things that we've been getting a lot of questions about is grazing the higher nitrate forage, because a lot of people had planted something, they were planning on haying it, and hay is actually a bit of a challenge with high nitrate, because if you cannot dilute it in some way, right? So if you can't grind it and mix it, it becomes very difficult to be able to use a high nitrate hay. Grazing is actually lower risk. And there's a few reasons why grazing is lower risk. So right there, making the switch from producing hay to grazing can be a great option for somebody who has a field that's a little bit higher in nitrates. The only other option from that standpoint that you might want to make a decision on is, can I ensile it? If you can ensile it rather than making hay, you can actually reduce the nitrates by about 50%. And so there's kind of your two options in my mind is, don't make hay, think about, can I graze it or can I make silage out of it? If you can graze it, then it's about management of grazing and how we can reduce the risk with the management of grazing.